Hi, my name's Maribel. One Sunday afternoon, at a family dinner meant to feel safe, my husband smashed his fist into my face, broke my nose, right in front of our son and every relative we had. No one screamed, no one moved. They looked away, pretending nothing happened, while I bled into a white napkin. I looked him straight in the eye and whispered, "No more." What came next? He never saw it coming. And neither will you. Before we dive in, where are you listening from tonight? And who would stand up for you if everyone stayed silent? Tell me in the comments. Bah! Sundays at Darius's family home always had the same rhythm. Fake smiles, tight hugs, and the weight of unspoken things hanging in the air. Everyone brought a dish, a compliment, and their best performance. I was no different. My job was to smile, speak softly, and not make waves. That's what a good wife did, especially in this family. That day, the living room was unusually bright, Texas sun pouring through the windows like honey, coating the polished furniture and reflecting off the gold-trimmed picture frames. Everything looked warm and peaceful, like a scene from a magazine. But beneath the surface, I felt it, the simmering tension. Darius had been quiet all morning, not angry exactly, just short. The kind of quiet that builds like a storm behind your ribs. I sat beside him on the love seat, Tyrell nestled on the floor with his tablet, oblivious to the adults. My mother-in-law was fussing with the roast. My sister-in-law laughed too loud at something her husband said. Everyone played their part. Then Darius brought it up. "We don't need to be throwing money away on piano lessons," he said, not looking at me. I felt my stomach tighten. "Tyrell loves it. He's improving, and it keeps him engaged after school." "We can't afford luxuries right now, Maribel," he snapped, voice sharper now. "It's $60 a week, Darius. That's not a luxury. That's an investment in our son." His eyes cut to me, flat, cold. "Don't start. Not here." I should have stopped, but something inside me cracked. Maybe it was the fake peace, maybe the years of being small. Maybe if you didn't spend hundreds on golf trips with your friends, we'd have more room in the budget. The room went silent. Even the clink of silverware stopped. Darius turned to me slowly. "What did you just say?" I said maybe we need to reevaluate. His fist came so fast, I didn't see it. Just a flash of movement, and then the burning crack of bone against bone. My face snapped sideways. I tasted metal. Warm blood spilled down my lips, onto my blouse, into the silence. Chairs scraped. Someone gasped, but no one moved. No one said a word. My sister-in-law looked down at her plate. My father-in-law adjusted his glasses. My mother-in-law took a sip of wine with a shaky hand. Tyrell's tablet clattered to the floor. He stared at me, eyes wide, mouth open, but frozen, just like everyone else. "Someone pass the napkins," I heard someone mumble. No one passed anything to me. I sat there, pulse roaring in my ears, blood running from my nose, the pain spreading across my face like fire. But it wasn't the hit that hurt most. It was the silence. The way everyone turned away like I'd spilled a drink, not my dignity. The way they swallowed their shame and pretended mine didn't exist. My hands trembled, but I reached into my purse, pulled out the white handkerchief I always carried. Not for show, just habit. I pressed it to my face, and when I pulled it away, the stark red against the fabric looked like a warning. I looked at Darius. He was breathing hard, still tense, like he was waiting for me to fight back or cry or run. But I did none of those things. I looked him straight in the eye. My voice didn't shake. "No more." The words were soft, but they landed hard. He blinked, startled, maybe because I didn't shout, maybe because I didn't cry, maybe because something in me shifted, and he could see it. But no one else said a word. They went back to their meals. Someone poured wine. Someone laughed too loudly again. The moment passed like it never happened, but it did. And what he and they didn't know was that I had already started keeping secrets of my own. It started months before the family dinner, late one night when the house had finally gone quiet. I was in the kitchen, pretending to clean, but really, I was just standing there, hands on the counter, lights dimmed, the sound of the dishwasher humming like it knew not to disturb me. Darius had gone to bed hours earlier, after slamming the bedroom door and mumbling something about how I never let things go. Terrell had drifted off in his room, buried under comic books and stuffed animals. The quiet was my only window. That was when I opened the drawer next to the fridge and pulled out the thin spiral notebook I had tucked beneath old appliance manuals and expired coupons. The first page had one sentence: June 14th. He grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. I stared at the words like they belonged to someone else, like they came from another life, but they were mine, and they were just the beginning. That night, I added more. Small things, but not really small. A shove when I asked a question he didn't like. A glass slammed too close to my hand. A threat whispered through clenched teeth after church when I'd laughed a little too long at something the pastor's wife said. I didn't write to feel better. I wrote so I wouldn't forget. Because it was so easy to forget when he kissed my forehead afterward and called it just stress. Later, I started taking photos, not full face, not dramatic, just pieces. A shadow on my collarbone, a bruise under my ribs. I'd make sure the lights were low. I'd zoom in enough so it looked abstract, just in case. I stored them in a hidden folder on my phone labeled grocery receipts. There were voice memos, too. I'd whisper into the recorder while loading the laundry. July 2nd. He came home drunk, accused me of talking to someone at the grocery store, said I made him look stupid. Each recording was under a minute, short enough to not draw attention, long enough to remember. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, sure I'd left something out. I'd check the notebook, check my phone, then I'd lie there, wondering what I'd say if he ever found it. I keep records for my sanity, I imagined saying, so I don't go crazy thinking I imagined it all. But deep down, I wasn't keeping it for me. I remembered one night, not long after I'd started the ledger, when I heard my sister-in-law on the phone in the kitchen. I had gone to grab a glass of water, but stopped when I heard my name. "She's dramatic," she said, with a sigh. "Darius just has a temper. All couples argue. She needs to stop making it a big deal." She laughed. That laugh stayed with me. It echoed again during the family dinner, when no one looked me in the eye, when silence filled the room like fog. I realized then that this wasn't just about Darius. It was about all of them. How they made space for it. How they protected him with their silence. They'd seen bruises before. I was sure of it. I wasn't just documenting for myself. I was documenting for Tyrell. Because if I stayed silent, what was I teaching him? That love meant fear? That you stay even when it hurts? That no one will help you so you don't ask? I couldn't let him grow up thinking this was what marriage looked like. So every time I wrote in that notebook, I pictured him grown, flipping through those pages, not to relive the pain, but to understand why his mother finally walked away. The ledger wasn't just a record, it was my truth, my insurance, my weapon. And then came the night I realized the ledger alone might not be enough. It had been another long day of pretending the bruise on my arm came from bumping into the door, pretending the tension in my shoulders was from a stressful day at work, not from flinching every time Darius walked past me too fast. Dinner was uneventful. Darius barely spoke. Terrell picked at his mashed potatoes, glancing back and forth between the two of us, as if waiting for the next eruption. Nothing came, just more silence. the kind that hums beneath your skin. After cleaning the dishes and folding the last load of laundry, I peeked into Tyrell's room to find him curled up under his blue quilt, staring at the glow in the dark stars we'd stuck to his ceiling last year. His favorite book, Charlotte's Web, was resting on his chest, unread. "Still awake?" I asked softly, stepping inside. He nodded but didn't speak. I sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a few strands of his hairs back from his forehead. His eyes were tired, but something in them kept flickering, like he wanted to say something but didn't know how to begin. I didn't push. We just sat in the quiet, his small hand resting on my knee. "You okay, baby?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He hesitated. Then, in a voice so small I almost missed it, he whispered, "Daddy hurts, Mommy." It wasn't a question, it wasn't a fear, it was a fact. Something in me broke, not loudly, not with sound, but like a plate slipping from your hands and shattering inside your chest. I swallowed hard, forcing the tears to stay where they were. He didn't need my crying, he needed my calm. "What makes you say that?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He didn't look at me. "I heard him yelling at you. I saw you holding your arm yesterday. And last month, your lip." His voice cracked on the last word. He turned his face into the pillow as if ashamed for noticing. I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell him he was imagining things. That grown-ups argue sometimes and everything was fine. That his daddy loved me, but I couldn't. Not after all this time. I reached for his hand, holding it between mine. "I'm sorry you had to see that," I said quietly. "It's not right, and it's not your fault." He looked at me then, his brown eyes wide and wet. "Why don't you tell someone?" That question stabbed deeper than the punch in the living room, deeper than any bruise. Because he deserved an answer. And I didn't have one that wouldn't sound like cowardice. "I'm trying to figure it out," I said, honestly. "It's complicated, but I promise, I'm working on it." He nodded slowly, but the crease between his brows didn't fade. That's when I realized the damage wasn't just to me. My silence hadn't protected him. It had trapped him. Later that night, after he fell asleep, I sat in the hallway outside his room, knees pulled to my chest, back against the wall. I stared at the closed door, hearing the soft rhythm of his breath through the wood. I kept thinking back to when I was his age. My own mother sat me down once, just once, and said, "Some things are better left unsaid, Mari. Talking only makes it worse." She was talking about my father. I knew it even then. I remembered the way she'd touch her cheek absent-mindedly, the way she never raised her voice at dinner, the way she said, "It's fine," like a habit. That phrase had lived in our house the way dust does, always settling, always ignored. I promised myself I would never be that kind of woman. And yet, here I was, telling myself to hold on a little longer, that it wasn't that bad, that things would get better. Tyrell's whisper had shattered that illusion. The damage wasn't hidden anymore. It was written all over my son's face. And I hated myself for letting it happen. That night, I stood up from the hallway, walked to his room again, and knelt beside him. His breathing was soft, his body still. I kissed his forehead gently. In that moment, I made a promise I didn't say out loud. Never again. No more lies, no more silence, no more pretending. But promises mean nothing if you can't keep them, and Darius was about to test mine. It had been a week since Tyrell whispered those 4 words that turned my world inside out. A week since I'd kissed his forehead and vowed, silently, never to let him see me cower again. Now we were here, another Sunday, another dinner. This time at Evelyn's house. The roast smelled the same. The table looked the same. Even the conversations, small, superficial, and safe, flowed with the same artificial ease. But nothing felt the same. I walked in with Tyrell's hand in mine, his fingers clutching mine tighter than usual. Darius trailed just behind us, already annoyed that I took too long getting ready. He hadn't said it, but I felt it. Evelyn greeted us at the door with that smile of hers, the one she reserved for show. Her eyes flicked from me to Darius, then down to Tyrell. She didn't hug me. She rarely did. The rest of the family was scattered around the living room: cousins, uncles, Darius's brothers, and their wives. Everyone holding plates, laughing too loud, sipping wine like it was armor. As we sat down to eat, I could feel Evelyn's eyes on me, studying, measuring, daring me. I knew that look. She was always waiting for me to act out, to give her a reason to paint me as unstable. Halfway through the meal, Darius's cousin Marcus made a joke about how Darius always had a short fuse, must run in the family. Laughter bubbled around the table. And that's when I did it. I looked up, smiled politely, and said, "Some tempers leave more than words behind." Silence. Forks paused mid-air. A glass clinked too hard against the edge of a plate. No one laughed this time. Eyes shifted around the table like they were trying to find the nearest exit. No one met mine, not even Evelyn. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, someone might say something. Instead, Darius let out a short, sharp laugh. He slammed his fork down just hard enough to make the plates rattle. "You should just stay quiet, Maribel," he said, loud and clear. "No one cares what you think." It didn't feel like a slap. It felt like ice water poured down my spine. Someone chuckled, one of the cousins, I think. But the sound was awkward, forced, and quickly died. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. But inside, something shriveled. Not from his words. I'd heard worse. It was Tyrell. He was sitting across from me, staring down at his plate, his little fingers picking at the corner of his napkin. He looked like he wanted to disappear. That look broke me. Not Darius's cruelty. Not the way Evelyn cleared her throat and launched into a story about her garden as if nothing had happened. Not the way the others followed her lead, pretending the moment didn't exist. It was Tyrell's silence, his quiet shame, because he saw it. He knew. And now he knew that even when I tried to speak, no one stood up. Not one of them. Not his father. Not his grandmother. Not a single damn person at that table. I stared at the centerpiece in front of me, some polished bowl filled with artificial fruit and dried flowers. So carefully arranged. So fake. Just like this family. I took a breath, held it, and let it out slowly. I smiled again. I even passed the mashed potatoes. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was done hoping. Done waiting for someone else to see what was happening and do something. Darius had tried to humiliate me in front of everyone. Evelyn had tried to erase it. The others had tried to pretend it wasn't real. But I was done being erased. That night, after we got home and Tyrell was asleep, I stood in the kitchen with the lights off. The house was quiet. Darius had gone to bed without a word. I leaned on the counter, staring out the window at nothing. The reflection staring back at me wasn't a woman defeated. It was a woman sharpening. That night, I lay awake, knowing the next warning I gave him wouldn't be spoken. It would be written. The house was still. Even the air felt frozen, like it refused to move in the same space where that dinner had happened. My body was stiff on the mattress, but my mind, it kept spinning. The dull ache in my face hadn't faded. The bridge of my nose throbbed from an earlier slap Darius had disguised with a bump into the cabinet, but I didn't need a mirror to know what it looked like. I turned to my side slowly, careful not to make the bed creak. Darius was already asleep, mouth slightly open, hand tucked under his pillow, his breath steady and deep like nothing in the world could touch him. Like nothing ever had. I reached for the drawer beside me. Tucked beneath a pile of socks, behind a birthday card from Tyrell that I kept hidden, was an old notebook. The corners were frayed, pages bent from years of disuse. It had once been for grocery lists and prayer notes. Tonight, it would become something else. My fingers trembled as I opened to the first clean page. I clicked the small flashlight I kept by the bed. Just enough light to see the lines, not enough to wake him. I wrote the date in the top corner. The ink bled just a little from the pressure of my pen. Then I wrote, "Dinner at Evelyn's. He humiliated me in front of everyone. Said, 'No one cares what you think.' No one defended me." Evelyn changed the subject. Tyrell looked ashamed. I wanted to scream. I paused. The words were ugly, not because of how they looked, but because they were real. They sat there in black and white, undeniable. I stared at them for a while, then kept going. I listed everything I could remember. The wine glass that shook in my hand. The way Evelyn's eyes narrowed when I opened my mouth. How Darius's hand gripped my thigh under the table when I dared to speak. I was afraid that writing it down would make it worse. But instead, each word felt like opening a window, letting air into a room that had long gone stale. By the time I finished, I could barely read my own handwriting. But I didn't need to. I had lived every word. The next morning, I tucked the notebook between the mattress and the bed frame, where only I knew the seam was loose. Darius was already in the kitchen when I came down. He was holding Tyrell's lunchbox like it was too heavy for him. "You're always so moody after we visit my family," he said, smirking. "Maybe next time, stay home." I gave him a tired smile, the kind women learn to wear like armor. I took the lunchbox from him and handed it to Tyrell without a word. That day, I folded laundry, cleaned the sink, and scrubbed the bathroom tiles like nothing had changed. But that night, I added a second entry. He called me moody, said I should stay home. It's how he makes things my fault. Always. Days passed like that, quiet on the surface, a storm gathering underneath. I wrote each night. Some entries were just a sentence or two. Others went on for pages. I documented every insult, every shove disguised as a joke, every bruise he never looked at. I began to take pictures too, small ones. I kept them hidden on a USB drive tucked inside a hollowed-out deodorant stick in the back of the bathroom drawer. One morning, I found a fading bruise on my upper arm, just beneath the sleeve. I had almost forgotten it was there. I took a picture in the bathroom mirror, the phone trembling in my hand. But one night, maybe a week into keeping the ledger, I almost threw it all away. It was late. Darius had fallen asleep, watching something loud and violent on TV. I was curled up on the edge of the bed, flipping through the notebook. The ink looked messier than usual. My words seemed dramatic, even petty. I felt foolish, like I was writing a story no one would ever believe. I reached for the corner of the page, ready to rip it out. Then I heard it. A small sound down the hall. Tyrell's voice, whispering through a dream. "Mommy!" He sounded scared. I froze. My fingers relaxed. The page stayed whole. I closed the notebook, held it tight to my chest, and whispered back to no one, "No more." That night, I underlined those words in thick black ink beneath my last entry. It became my anchor. During the day, I played my role. I packed lunches. I nodded during meaningless conversations. I even kissed Darius on the cheek when his mother was around. But every moment I could steal in private, I kept building. I copied text messages he sent when he was angry. I memorized phone numbers for shelters. I researched how long bruises take to fade. From the outside, I was quiet. But inside, I was documenting everything, turning pain into proof. I was building my escape. But when Darius found the notebook under my pillow, I thought everything was over. It was sometime past midnight when I felt the shift in the room. I had just drifted into the edge of sleep when the sudden slam of the drawer snapped me upright. Darius stood at the foot of the bed, the notebook clutched in his hand. Pages bent, spine warped from how tightly he held it. His eyes weren't wild. They were worse than that. Cold, calculating, coiled. "You've been writing about me," he said, his voice low, almost calm. That tone frightened me more than shouting ever could. I sat up slowly, my heart thudding against my ribs. I didn't speak. There was nothing I could say that wouldn't make it worse. Silence, I'd learned, was sometimes the only thread between breathing and breaking. He raised the notebook above his head, then let it drop onto the floor with a thud that felt louder than it should have. "Who were you planning to show this to? The cops? A lawyer? My mother?" I flinched as he stepped closer, his shadow swallowing mine. "You think they'd believe you?" he sneered. "You think anyone gives a damn about your little diary?" He shoved me backward into the dresser. The edge caught my hip hard. Pain bloomed, sharp and familiar. But I didn't cry out. I wouldn't give him that. "You're trying to ruin me, Maribel, after everything I've done for you, after all I've let you have." Let me have. The words echoed inside me, and I thought of everything I'd ever swallowed to keep the peace. My voice, my pride, my safety. From down the hall, Tyrell stirred. I heard the creak of his door and a soft, "Mom?" Darius's head whipped toward the hallway. I held my breath. "You wake him up with your games?" he hissed. "You want him to see this? You want him to hate me?" I wanted to scream back. He already sees it. He already knows. But I stayed still, quiet, watching. "Answer me," he growled, slamming his hand against the dresser beside my head. I looked at him, not past him, not through him, but directly at him. And I said nothing. He faltered for just a second. I saw it. My silence hit him harder than I expected. He picked up the notebook again, tore out a few pages, crumpled them, and shoved them into the trash can. "This is what your little rebellion looks like?" he mocked. "Paper?" I bent slowly, keeping my eyes on him, and picked up one of the torn pages from the floor, folded it neatly, slid it into my robe pocket. I didn't break eye contact. He stepped back like he'd been slapped. "You think you're strong now?" he spat. "You're nothing without me." I didn't respond. I just stood there, holding that scrap of paper like it was made of steel. He left the room without another word. Later that night, the kitchen lights glared too brightly. The hum of the fridge filled the silence as I sat at the table. Darius placed a glass of wine in front of me, like we were just another married couple finishing a long day. He sat across from me, leaned back in the chair with a practiced calm, and said, "You'll keep your mouth shut, for Tyrell's sake, right?" I stared at the wine. The glass shook slightly in my hand, but I didn't drink it. His tone turned sweet, like poison dipped in honey. "You don't want to lose him, do you?" I nodded once, small, submissive. The kind of nod he'd expect, but inside me, something was changing shape. He thought that one notebook was all I had, that a few torn pages could erase the truth, that threats wrapped in fatherly concern would be enough to bind me in place. He had no idea what I was still building. That night, when the house was dark and his breathing turned deep and steady beside me, I slipped out of bed, walked quietly to the hall closet, and retrieved a second notebook from a box labeled Winter Decorations. I opened it to a clean page, wrote the date, and beneath it, 3 words, "He found it." Then I underlined it twice and whispered to myself, "You're not done." Because if he could destroy one, I'd write 10 more. I'd write until the truth outgrew the lies. Until no one, not him, not his mother, not the neighbors who smiled but looked away, could pretend they didn't know. That night, I started a second notebook, hidden where he would never think to look. After I slipped that second notebook into the box marked Winter Decorations, I barely slept. Not because I feared Darius would find it, though that fear never fully left me, but because something had shifted inside me. The act of beginning again wasn't just survival this time. It felt like reclaiming something I hadn't even realized I'd lost. The next morning, I waited until he left for work before taking Terrell to school. After I dropped him off, I drove straight to the grocery store. I didn't need milk or eggs. I needed a new notebook. Something small enough to hide, but sturdy enough to carry everything I'd been too afraid to say out loud. I lingered in the stationery aisle longer than necessary. A woman next to me asked if I was buying supplies for my kids. I nodded, gave her a soft smile, and reached for a blue spiral notebook, the kind students use. I added a black pen, then walked calmly to the checkout. It was a warm Tuesday morning, and the sunlight felt indifferent. Back home, I tucked the new notebook into one of Tyrell's old school binders, sliding it behind math worksheets and spelling lists from 3rd grade. I placed it in a bin marked Donate, shoved it to the back of the closet, and closed the door. That night, after Darius had gone to bed and the house settled into its unnatural quiet, I opened the notebook and wrote, Tuesday. He said I make him act this way. He laughed after calling me useless. Terrell heard. I saw him pause at the hallway, then walk away. He's starting to turn invisible, like I used to. I let the ink run for a second longer than necessary. I closed the book and buried it back in its hiding place. Over the next few days, I made the entries part of my routine. Every night, I recorded the words Darius used. The threats that weren't quite threats, the bruises that didn't leave deep marks, the cruel glances over dinner that made me feel smaller than a whisper. I started taking pictures again, quiet snaps of my shoulder, the back of my thigh, the faint imprint of his hand near my ribs. I saved them in a locked folder on a hidden cloud drive. I renamed the folder Recipes 2021. He never once clicked on it. Sometimes I whispered into my phone when I was alone, describing the day. I didn't always replay the audio. It was too hard to hear myself like that. But knowing the words were captured somewhere gave me strength, like pieces of armor slowly forming around me. It was Camille I turned to next. She'd been my friend long before Darius came into my life. We'd grown up 2 blocks apart, shared first crushes, heartbreaks, and the awkward in-between years. After I married Darius, I pulled away from a lot of people, but Camille never fully let go. I called her on a Friday, asked if I could stop by for coffee the next morning. When I arrived, she greeted me with that same hug she'd always given, the kind that wraps around you like a quilt. We sat at her kitchen table, sipping hazelnut coffee while her dog lay snoring by our feet. We chatted about nothing for 20 minutes. I talked about Terrell's schoolwork, and she mentioned a leaky faucet. But then I reached into my bag, pulled out a manila envelope, and slid it across the table toward her. Inside were printed photos, transcribed entries from the new notebook, and a written letter explaining what had been happening. She didn't speak at first, just read. When she looked up, her eyes were glassy. "Maribel," she said, her voice cracking, "why didn't you come to me sooner?" I had no answer that didn't sound like an excuse. "I need someone to know in case. In case it gets worse," I whispered. "Would you keep a copy, just in case?" She didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." That moment did more than just relieve the loneliness. It was the first time someone saw me, not as a nagging wife or a woman who should be grateful, but as a person in pain, holding on. A few nights later, as I scribbled in the notebook by my bedside lamp, Tyrell walked in. He didn't say anything, just walked over, placed his small hand gently on mine, and looked at me with the eyes of someone far too young to carry what he already knew. I closed the notebook and kissed his forehead. When I tucked him back into bed, he whispered, "I'm glad you're writing it down." I held it together until I was back in my room. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and wept into my hands. Soft, silent tears that no longer came from hopelessness, but from the weight of being believed. Darius, of course, started to notice the change. I was quieter, yes, but not afraid the way he was used to. I moved differently, not defiant, but composed. He mistook it for submission. One evening, after I handed him his drink and sat beside him on the couch, he said, "You've finally learned your place. Good girl." I smiled. It wasn't real, and he didn't know that made it more dangerous. Because now, every time I wrote something down, every time I clicked a photo or whispered into my phone, I wasn't documenting pain. I was laying bricks. One by one, a path, a wall, a way out. This wasn't a diary anymore. It was proof. It was protection. It was for Tyrell. And for me. But the night Darius forced another family dinner, I knew the blade I'd been sharpening was about to cut. He said it was going to be a family celebration. That's how Darius framed it, like he was doing everyone a favor. Evelyn was hosting, of course. Her house always looked like a showroom during these dinners. Pristine, too perfect to feel like home. She insisted on cooking every dish herself, even though we all knew she just reheated catered food and added sprigs of parsley for show. I didn't want to go, but I didn't argue, not out loud. Tyrell sat next to me in the car, quiet as usual, fiddling with the frayed strap of his backpack. He'd started bringing it everywhere lately, even to dinner. When I asked why once, he shrugged. I didn't push. Maybe we both needed something to hold on to. Inside, the dining room buzzed with the usual forced laughter. Someone had brought wine. The cousins were talking too loud. Evelyn greeted me with a smile that didn't touch her eyes, and Darius stood behind her like some proud host, ready to put on a show. He kept his hand on my back as we walked in, just enough pressure to remind me who he thought I belonged to. Dinner started the same as always. Awkward small talk, overseasoned food, and polite smiles. But beneath it all was that humming tension. I could feel it pulsing under the table, under my skin. My hands stayed folded in my lap, but inside I was holding a match and a memory, ready to use both. About halfway through the meal, someone, Darius's cousin Ken, made a joke about his wife overspending. The room chuckled. Darius leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said, "You should ask Maribel. She's great at keeping things hidden. Just ask her about her little notebooks." The room tensed. Nervous laughs trickled around the table. Evelyn kept cutting her roast like nothing had happened. I didn't say a word, just looked at my plate. That silence, that composure, was gasoline to Darius. He slammed his glass down so hard, water spilled across the tablecloth. "You think you're better than me now?" His voice climbed. "Sitting there like some saint? You really think they care about your little scribbles?" And then, before I could move or speak or brace, he struck me. The sound cracked through the room. His hand across my cheek, my head snapping sideways. My chair scraped the floor as I nearly lost balance. Tyrell gasped. Somewhere, a fork dropped. And then silence. A silence that screamed louder than the slap ever could. I touched my face. My fingers came back red. No one moved. No one helped. I stood up slowly. My knees didn't buckle. My voice didn't shake. I met Darius's eyes, and for the first time, he didn't see fear. He saw fire. No more. I reached into my bag, pulled out the second notebook, and placed it on the center of the table, right next to Evelyn's gold-rimmed gravy boat. "This," I said, "is every word, every bruise, every lie, dated, documented, backed up." The room stayed frozen. Darius lunged for it. His hand stretched toward the notebook like it might burn him, but I was faster. I stepped back and raised my voice, cold and steady. "Touch it, and the police will have the copies by morning. They already know who to ask. You lay a single finger on me again, and you'll see how many eyes have finally opened." He stopped. Not because he believed me, but because he felt that I believed me. I looked at Evelyn. Her knife hovered above her untouched carrots. I looked around the table, every face downcast, every mouth closed, except mine. I lifted the notebook, held it against my chest, and repeated the words I'd once whispered in the dark. No more. The room didn't breathe, and when his mother finally spoke, her words would decide everything. Evelyn's fork hovered mid-air. Her hand trembled, eyes locked on the blood still trickling from my lip. The silence in the room was suffocating, each second stretching longer than the last. Then she set the fork down. "I knew," she whispered. Heads turned. My heart stopped. "I knew something was wrong for years," Evelyn said, eyes still on the untouched plate. "I saw the bruises, heard the arguments, but I told myself it wasn't my business." Her voice cracked. "I didn't want to believe it was my son." Darius stiffened, his face draining. "Mom, don't." But she kept going. "I looked away when you called her names. When Terrell cried in his room, I said it was just a phase. I'm sorry, Maribel. I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner." The air shifted. Something ancient, some unspoken pact of silence in that family, cracked wide open. Darius pushed his chair back, loud and sudden. "This is ridiculous," he barked, standing. "You're all just going to believe her? She's making this up. This is revenge. She's poisoning you all." "Stop," I said, my voice low but firm. He spun toward me, wild-eyed. "You think you can ruin me with that stupid notebook? You think anyone cares about your little sob story?" I didn't flinch. He looked around the table, searching for an ally, someone to nod, to validate the version of himself he clung to. But no one moved. And then Terrell stood. He stepped away from his chair, small hands clenched at his sides, chin trembling, but eyes locked on his father. "I saw you hit her," he said. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. Darius's mouth opened, but no sound came. The room was still. "I saw you do it," Terrell repeated, softer this time. "You always say we should tell the truth." That was it. No shouting, no more fists. Just a truth too clear to deny. I reached for Terrell's hand and stood. No one stopped me. Not Evelyn, not his sisters, not even Darius. The second notebook was tucked under my arm. The weight of it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a shield. We walked out the door. At the police station, the fluorescent lights were harsh, but they didn't bother me. I handed over everything: the notebook, the flash drive with photos, the printed text messages. The officer read silently, flipping through each page. He nodded, took notes, asked questions, respectfully, gently. "This is my statement," I said. He looked up. "You did the right thing, ma'am." I exhaled. Not relief exactly, but something close, a loosening in my chest I hadn't felt in years. The weeks that followed felt like walking through fog. Court hearings, depositions, paperwork. Reporters camped outside Darius's workplace, digging through the cracks of his perfect image. His charm couldn't save him now. Some in his family avoided me completely. Others sent awkward texts. "Thinking of you. Hope you're okay." But the silence was louder than anything they said. Evelyn reached out once. I didn't answer. Maybe one day, not now. Terrell and I moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. Nothing fancy. Peeling paint in the hallway, a squeaky dryer in the basement. But it was ours. He picked the room with the bigger window, said he liked the way the light hit the wall in the morning. I bought a new notebook, plain blue cover, no hidden codes, no pain to track. On the first page, I wrote, "No more," and then beneath it, "Now begins." Every night, I write a few lines. Not about bruises, but about breakfasts we cook together, books we read, Questions Terrell asks me when we walk to the corner store. There are still hard days. I won't pretend otherwise. Some nights I check the locks 3 times before I sleep. But there's no more pretending, no more covering, no more silence. There are scars you carry forever, but they no longer define me. I am not his shadow anymore. I am my own.